The Machenike G5 Pro. Thank God I looked up the English pronunciation, or I'd be calling it the Machenike throughout the entire video, which actually sounds kind of cool. It's a $60 PC and Switch controller that does have magnetic Hall effect thumbstick modules that will not get that stick drift, no sir, no ma'am, and it features some other Pro controller features such as mechanical face buttons and Dpad, 2 itty bitty tiny rear buttons that are reprogrammable on the fly if you can decipher Egyptian hieroglyphics. Yeah, it's confusing. And a controller that was incredibly highly recommended to be reviewed on the channel. Not even recommended, I was basically told I had to pick this thing up or my kneecaps would be broken. My followers were just gonna grab a bunch of tube socks and collect a bunch of bars of soap and go for the ankles. And I like my ankles the way they are. So here it is, here's the review. Machenike, it's actually the Machenike G5 Pro. Also, there's a group buy with this controller, which I've never presented to my audience before, but you just purchase it as normal, and for the next 10 days, you save a little bit of cash. After that, it's a $61 controller, so break out your bank book, you big spender, you. But in the meantime, there's a group buy. You just squat up with the homies that you've never met before on the internet. Everyone's buying one of these at the same time, and then you save like 10 bucks. In essence, that's how it works. Let's get it.
This is your controller captain. We've reached 6,900 feet. Go ahead and start flicking the sticks and mollywopping the back paddles.
You don't like back paddles? How about those rear buttons? We've tested almost 100 custom and premium controllers, and we're only at the beginning. You need a thumbstick guide or tutorial on how to overclock your controller? Check out the controller playlist.
Bing bong.
Controller captain out.
A quick disclaimer for my audience, the Stallions and Stallionettes. This controller was sent for review, but this is going to be an honest, comprehensive review. I haven't been paid or told to say anything about it, so if there's any cons, shortcomings, or areas of improvement, you're going to hear about it. So these companies make better products over time. Basically, during this group buy session, which is going to be the 9th to the 19th of June, if you click on this, spend $1 for this reservation card, it gives you a $10 early discount, knocking the price from $56 to $46. But keep in mind, after the 19th, this controller will regularly be priced at $61. As for the packaging on the $61 Machenike G5 Pro, $61 recommended MSRP without the group buy that I covered earlier. Pretty simplistic gray and purple box. If you wanted to pause the screen to read some of the key features, you may do so now. Note there is 3 QR codes on the back. This one is in English. I'm not sure if that's for the instruction manual or if we do still have a physical instruction manual, which we do, but it's pretty hot garbage. Very simplistic packaging, a little sneeze cover here, dust guard down there, some plastics holding it in place, no laser cut foam or anything like that. You've got your 2.4 gigahertz dongle, no dust cover, the plastics do feel relatively cheap, little plastic sticker on the back, G5 Pro branding. And in here we have one of the shortest USB-C cables I've ever seen, just rubber, not microfiber or braided. Probably just gonna chuck this thing, but as this controller doesn't have a permanently affixed cable, they are modular, removable. You can bring your own, maybe something a little bit longer, more colorful to fit your setup. This is actually just going to go straight in the rubbish receptacle under the desk. That's where that belongs. And then you have the controller, which I must have pressed a button because there's already RGB lighting just tickling my corneas. Oh boy. Let's cut some lights for a sec. I'm not going to jump into the cosmetics department as much as I want to because this is a very unique and, in my opinion, pretty sick looking controller. Let's turn you off. I'm turned on, but let's turn the controller off to save a little juice. Had my finger bent at a very weird angle. This is going to be an interesting review. Some unique words to be said here. My golly, jeepers, this is just crazy.
Cut the camera. I need some alone time with this thing and dim the lights because things are going to get romantic.
As for the cosmetics, the most articulate thing to say is this controller looks sick as fuck. Did you see that little startup sequence with the RGB LED lights? This smoked haze faceplate that is actually kind of a gradient. It's more translucent up here and then becomes more silver, less opaque up here. It just looks super sick. It looks good from the front, it looks good from the top, and guess what? Backside, tuchus, rump, pretty decent as well, probably the ugliest side. Instead of rubberized grips or even some good stippling on the plastics, you just have these little plastic bumps which don't really do much and don't look great either. But from the top or front, this just looks so sick. Cosmetics, I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10. 9 out of 10. They could have done a little bit more back here for the rumpkin. As for the ergonomics and comfort on the Machenike Gemini 6, it's flippin' amazing. The manufacturer's weight and dimensions is going to be popping up somewhere on screen in this general vicinity here, but as far as the real-world ergonomics and comfort when you wrap your gamer hands around this bad boy, it feels almost perfect. My only complaints are going to be on the back. You have this relatively cheap-feeling plastic, and even if it is going to be plastic, the stippling isn't great. It doesn't provide much grip or much comfort, so it doesn't really fall in either category of being good. And the rear buttons, I have some complaints, which we'll talk about during the rear button section. They're not terrible, but they could be better. But I think what really shines here is just going to be the shell design, the dimensions. It's a very well sculpted controller. It fits in your hand, very comfortable, how you just want to rest your hands. And if you've played with something like an Xbox controller, then you should feel right at home. I'm going to give ergonomics and comfort a 7 out of 10, due to the rear buttons and rear plastics just not feeling the best. As for the build quality, I was trying to think of a controller I've tested recently that felt this secure and well buttoned down, especially in the price point, and nothing came to mind, especially for the fact it has the detachable magnetized faceplate, which usually makes a controller feel very janky, wobbly, wiggly in your hand. This one, not the case. It feels incredibly secure when the faceplate is installed, and just trying to give the controller the flex or stress test, bending it back and forth, there's no creaks or moans and groans, really tight panel gaps. There is no exposed screws whatsoever. For disassembly or teardown, I'm assuming you'll access these 2 screws under the faceplate. The only thing that would make this controller feel a little bit better is if it had rubberized grips instead of this cheap feeling plastic on the back. Not only does this not look great, it doesn't feel very good either in comparison to all the other plastics and rubber on the controller. Keep in mind, you do have a mechanical D-pad and face buttons, which feel fantastic as well. Bringing together the whole package, 9.5 out of 10. That's probably one of the highest scores I've given for build quality on the channel ever. Over here on the warranty page on their website, this is just good, clean fun. What is valid proof of purchase? A printed receipt, I would think, or a soft copy of the receipt, perhaps an email. And they list some incredibly reputable sources that you can buy all kinds of silly stuff. AliExpress, Shopee, Lazada, those digital back alleys that you scroll for cheap electronic goods. Now, what I do like to see here, this is a 2-year warranty, so that's double what most controller companies are willing to offer. That's if they're feeling generous. Companies like Scuff and Hex Gaming are comfortable offering a 6-month warranty. There are even companies out there offering 3-month warranties, or even a 30-day warranty on their controllers. We've seen it all here on the channel. It's all very unacceptable. This is just components, and it says nothing anywhere in this warranty policy about any peripherals such as their keyboards or their gaming controllers, which I'm assuming are only covered for 1 year, and I do wish it was clear cut and dry what this controller had. As for the D-pad or direction buttons, it is mechanical switches, which isn't out of the ordinary. We've tested those on the channel in the past. However, these feel unique. They're a lot more floaty than other buttons, which do have 4 distinct steps, or perhaps 8 distinct steps. If you rest your thumb directly in the center and just roll back and forth, it kind of blends together like a big bowl of clicky soup. I'm going to set down my ladle because I'm just simply not a huge fan. Mechanical switches are good from the durability standpoint of lasting longer, having a tap life cycle over traditional membrane switches, and depending on personal preference, they might actually feel quite a bit better too. I just don't like how floaty, i.e. all the inputs kind of blend together. Is this right up or just right? Or shoot, actually now I'm pressing down and I'm not even trying to. This is just incredibly floaty, and it does become apparent in gameplay as well. So if you're playing retro games, maybe some platformers, something where you're primarily using the D-pad for movement, I would probably look for another gamepad. 5.5 out of 10. I know that's remarkably low for a mechanical D-pad. I'd actually rather have just a stock feeling membrane D-pad in this controller. As for the face or action buttons, cosmetically I do like this gray lettering. I do not like that it is a gloss finish which will collect fingerprints and eventually micro scratches. If Mike and Ike over here could go with a flat matte finish on the face buttons, that'd be phenomenal. But these are mechanical and they do feel fantastic. Unlike the D-pad, which is mechanical but doesn't feel great, these actually do feel phenomenal. What I love about these buttons is that they require quite a bit more resistance than almost any mechanical or membrane switch that I have used. They almost feel instantaneous because there is a very, very short pull before the switch is actuated. Overall, these are fantastic buttons. It looks like standard Xbox sizing and spacing, which no complaint here, and they're a little bit flatter than Xbox buttons, which I do like to see. I'm going to give these an 8.5 out of 10. Repeat, an 8.5 out of 10. Now, as for the accessory button suite, that's going to be the old Mike and Ike button, or this massive M logo, then your pause, options, and share button. There is no 3.5mm headphone jack on the bottom of this controller, which I do think should be a standard feature on all controllers, because even though I've made the transition to wireless headset ages ago, and I swear by them, I've explained why they're the bee's knees and the mule's nips, but a lot of gamers still prefer to go wired, to go tethered. That's cool, unless you have a controller like this that doesn't let you do it. So that would get looped into the accessory button suite. That's going to lose a point because we lost a port. Mike and Ike putting you back in the vending machine. All 4 of these buttons are mechanical, not membrane switches, which is pretty sweet. Click, 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 very clicky. They're also in a good position, raised far enough from the front shell to where they're easy to hit. I have no complaints. In fact, I like them quite a bit. The only complaint with the accessory button suite is that lack of a 3.5mm jack. So that can just jack right off 1 point from the score, giving this a 9 out of 10. Thumbsticks, analog sticks, joysticks. Big old fat fan. They are magnetic Hall effect modules, so in essence these should never get stick drift. They could if the spring wears out, but that is such a small point of failure compared to potentiometer sensors and carbon contact patches and all the other moving mechanical parts, considering there's no actual physical connection with these modules, rather the breaking of magnet connectivity that's telling your controller, hey, these thumbsticks are moving around. And because of that, in essence, these are stick drift proof. That's awesome. What's not awesome is unfortunately we're only seeing this technology implemented on Switch. Hasn't really made its way to the other controller platforms like Xbox and PlayStation yet. Now there are adapters that allow you to use those controllers on other platforms, but there's generally some limitations. And I have tested quite a few on the channel. Those are all in the controller playlist, which is linked in the description below. So as I remove the faceplate and then I pop off this thumbstick cap, you're able to see the actual thumbstick module in there. Well, you can't, but I can, and your eyes are about to become my eyes through some B-roll. These modules do feel buttery smooth, and one thing that I like is there are anti-friction rings, so when you are at full lock, you're just gliding along that smooth plastic. And these are actually some of the smoothest anti-friction rings I've ever used. Clicking down L3 and R3 is pretty tight and secure, also pretty quiet. Good resistance on these sticks, respectable amount of travel. They snap back to their neutral position quite quickly. Nothing offends me from afar, but time to bust out our monocle and get a little bit closer, plugging it to Project Zero to get some technical analysis, get the data, the numbers. Let's do it. Over here, wired up to the PC with my own USB-C cable of a proper length, not that little tiny thing that came with it. This controller looks so sick. There is a 4-way dip switch on the back, and make sure if you are going wired to the PC that you do select, please autofocus for me, thank you, PC/iOS. It's really interesting that PC and iOS share the same compatibility switch on here. Obviously, if you are going to go wireless to the PC with a 2.4 gigahertz dongle, then you are going to switch it to 2.4 G mode, which will start using the internal battery. But for the sake of testing, anytime we're going to be doing any overclocking, measuring the polling rate, testing the thumbsticks, I do recommend going wired or tethered, as you are going to have the most accurate readings. Let's get to it. As you see, a very good resting value here as I move them to and fro. Yeah, they bump back to 0.002 pretty consistently. Definitely no out-of-the-box stick drift, that's for sure. And keep in mind, there is a calibration mode that you can run if you are having any issues. When I say run, it is built directly into the controller. You do not need external software for that. So that's really good, because if you don't have a PC, you're a console player, shouldn't be experiencing any stick drift because these are magnetic Hall effect sensors. But if they're not very accurate or responsive for you, maybe you're coming from potentiometer thumbstick modules and you're like, wow, these really aren't that responsive. I thought they'd be even more accurate. Just run a calibration. That might tighten things up for you. Speaking of tighten things up for us, let's do a circularity test to get our thumbstick accuracy, which is freakishly accurate. Again, just like golf, lower number, better here. So under a 1% average error rate, that is fantastic to see. Nothing but purple here. Couple of delicious pies. I'm going to give these thumbsticks a 10 out of 10. I don't think I've ever given a perfect score to thumbsticks on the channel, but the fact this does have compatibility with Control Freaks, the fact that these are incredibly responsive right out of the gate, they are Hall effect modules, is fantastic. The only downside here is, again, this isn't for PlayStation or Xbox unless you're running an adapter. The bumpers are a form of fecal matter, meaning that they're quite shitty. And that comes to the shape. They're completely flat. Any other bumper which are rounded, there's a little bit of a cutout here on the side, but that does nothing for ergonomics or comfort. You do have this little stippling or texture on top, which does nothing for grip either. And while you can actuate these with the meat of your index finger pretty easily, if you try and press them with the tip, you're going to have some problems because they are on a swivel or hinge mechanism up here. And because they're flat, they just don't feel very great. I'm going to give them a 5 out of 10. Repeat, a 5 out of 10. Moving on to the triggers. You have that same stippling or texture on the plastics, which again isn't doing anything for grip, but it does feel okay on the fingertips. They do also look good with the silver metallic paint. And quick note, there's a couple of manufacturing scratches here. I haven't done anything to this back shell, but yet there's some imperfections, some marring on this plastic here. I don't like to see that. I do love the resistance of these triggers. It feels a little bit stronger than most standard controllers. Good amount of travel, so if you're playing racing games, that is very nice. No trigger stops or locks. They do have a G6 model that has 3-way trigger stops, and I likely will be testing that on the channel as well. These triggers feel nice in hand. I'm going to give them an 8 out of 10. Repeat, an 8 out of 10. You do have two pretty tiny rear buttons sunk almost flush with the rear shell, which you think should be a pretty good thing for comfort, which it is, but as far as actually using these buttons, they're not very accessible. The strike zone, or the acceptable hitbox, if you will, the place where you press these buttons and they're actually going to actuate is pretty small. It's really only right here where my index finger is, and they require a good amount of strength or resistance to press. I mean, you are not going to get any false actuations here. In fact, you're going to have the opposite issue where you're like, damn, there's no button where I want them to be. Not only are these in a weird place, but they're also very small, and they do require a freakish amount of strength, probably the strongest or hardest buttons to press that I've ever tested. Those three aspects make these buttons not very easy to hit, not very accessible when you want to hit the rear buttons. Plus, the plastics used feel incredibly cheap, don't provide any grip, and don't feel good on your fingertips. But as you can see where my middle fingers rest, I can't really hit these buttons with the tips. I can roll the bone of my middle finger, press them with the meat right here, but a lot of times in gameplay, that just simply didn't work because I would kind of clinch up to hit those rear buttons or give them a nice little squeeze. They weren't where I thought they would be or should be. And when I actually did hit them, there were a few times where I just didn't press them hard enough to actuate the switch. So not a huge fan of these at all. In fact, one of my least favorite rear buttons that I've tested. You can rebind them on the fly, but that is also a little bit of a pain in the rump. If you've ever watched the show Lost and thought you were confused and thought you were indeed lost yourself, show is quite aptly named, not because they're lost on an island, but because I'm lost. It's confusing. The process, the procedure to rebind the rear buttons on the fly is such a pain in the wiener schnitzel that you're probably just going to want to install the driver, the software, which we'll tour in a second. The problem is a two-parter. The rear buttons double as macro buttons, so not just single press buttons, but also macros where you press multiple button presses, and you have a string of actions happen on screen for just pressing that one button. The wording in the instruction manual explaining how to actually rebind these rear buttons is just downright confusing. Also a little typo right there, you spelled customizable wrong. I'm gonna give the rear buttons on the G5 Pro a 2 out of 10. There's 2 of them and 10 reasons I don't like them.
So it says in the instruction manual that you have driver support at this website. However, if you come over here, there's all this processor support. You scroll your happy ass down here to peripherals, not in a keyboard or mouse. It's a gamepad. Sequel, the G6 over here, but this firmware, this program does not work with the G5, so there is no software program that I could find for this. As far as battery life, there's a ton of useful factoids inside of the user brochure, including the fact that it's capped to 5 volts at charge, and the battery capacity is 600 milliamp hour. Charge time is 2 to 4 hours, but what's the estimated battery life? I don't know because I haven't been able to kill this thing yet. Over here in X input test, we're going to measure the input lag or delay by getting our refresh rate. We're going to run 1,000 sample tests. I'm going to move the left analog stick in a circle, and I think we're going to like the numbers that we see popping up on screen as they're indicating, wow, that completed really fast, that test, because the computer received that 1,000 inputs quite quickly. Good clean test here. We only have 2 outliers, so not taking into account these 2 outliers, which are going to be 2 large numbers that just don't match up with the rest of these statistics here. We're getting an average of 2 milliseconds on the first pull on a 500 hertz polling rate. Let's run it again. Another 2. That one was a little bit less consistent with the minimum and maximum further from each other. Let's run it again. Whoa, no, whoa. She's jumping on me. Fucking Bronco here. What the hell is going on in this world? So that is the best results. I know there's 64 outliers there, but she was a little finicky in X input test. I'm not going to lie. This test relatively consistent with the minimum and maximum, not that far from each other. Very low jitter as well. Still getting an average of 2 milliseconds. Incredibly respectable on that 500 hertz stock polling rate. What about that wireless dongle though? How fast is that? I plugged it into Project Zero, that dongle, and now I'm going to switch that dip switch to that 2.4G option in the back. Nothing's happening. What's going on here? Now to go wireless with this controller, whether it's on PC, Android TV box like the NVIDIA Shield, or the Nintendo Switch by plugging that 2.4G dongle into the side of your dock, you still need to put this controller into pairing mode. In order to do that from the off state where no lights are lit up, hold down this home button for 3 seconds. You will get these rapid lights flashing, and then plug your dongle in. Getting this controller up and running with that 2.4 gigahertz dongle was so much more finicky and so many more steps and such a pain in the ass compared to almost every other controller where it's just plug and play. You actually have a sync button on the back of the dongle, plus the 4-way compatibility switch in the back. Then it doesn't automatically go into pairing mode. Yeah, anyway, I don't know how I did it. I don't know what changed, or I don't know what shifted on the Earth's axis, or if Mercury was in retrograde or what, but it's paired up now via wireless. It's already moving on its own. I'm not touching that analog stick. From the top, please. I'd like an accurate read. That's not an accurate test. It's already moving. There we go. Okay. Extremely respectable. 4 milliseconds of input lag or delay on a 250 hertz stock overclock when going wireless with that 2.4 gigahertz dongle. Exact same measurement of jitter, and it's pretty consistent as well. Instead of 1 and 5, I believe it was, we're getting 3 and 11. That will fluctuate from test to test, but that is quite consistent. I like what I see here. Stock input lag or delay, we're talking about 2 milliseconds wired and 4 milliseconds unwired, unhinged, wireless, and very consistent on both sides of the house. Is this controller susceptible to being overclocked? Let's find out right now. Over here in the Lord of Mice overclocking software, no controller detected because it's not plugged in. If I plug her in, you are going to see there she is, HID compliant game controller, not overclocked on its stock clock for an estimated 2 to 10 milliseconds of input lag or delay. That's such a wide range there. Let's tauten her up by overclocking the ever-living shnikes out of it. And unfortunately, I did the thing with the thing. I inverted the doohickey, I flipped the doodads, the niblets, the giblets, the lug nuts. It's overclocked. Unfortunately, not only is this controller not susceptible to being overclocked, it doesn't do anything for it, but it actually seems to go the other way, as we were around 2 milliseconds on the stock clock, and now overclocked, it's actually around 3 to 4 milliseconds. I was getting as high as 4.8 at sometimes. So no, do not overclock this controller. It's actually detrimental. But luckily the stock numbers are quite respectable at 2 milliseconds wired and 4 milliseconds wireless with that dongle. This controller does have some built-in, well, controls. By holding down this function button, left on the D-pad is going to turn up and down the brightness. That's off, low, medium, and high. You really can't tell much of a difference. Then holding down the function button and right on the D-pad is going to scroll through the different lighting modes. So you saw breathing, fading in and out. Oh, that's cool. That one is really neat. That one's even cooler. That's too much for me. Not disorienting, so if you're playing in a dark room, you can turn it off. And these 4 LEDs are going to be for your battery status. Now, as far as compatibility, when you're playing on the Switch, you can't actually wake up the console, which is awesome because a lot of wireless controllers that are third party, you just can't do that. You also have gyroscope motion control, as well as vibration. Amiibo? Does it do amiibos? Amiibo support? Yay, nay. Now, as for the cons, pros, and verdicts, let's start with the cons, the shortcomings, the areas of improvement. Well, the first one isn't necessarily the fault of the manufacturer. It just happens to be that the only platforms this controller works on is Switch, Android set-top boxes, and PC, which isn't a surprise because thus far the only controllers with magnetic Hall effect thumbstick modules have been on the Switch platform. The next one is the D-pad. It's atrocious. It is the worst D-pad that I've tested with mechanical switches. Blech, don't like it. The bumpers I was not a fan of due to that shape. The back plastics feel incredibly cheap, and those rear buttons just aren't very ergonomic, aren't in a great place, and are kind of hard to hit. You can't really actuate them as needed. The whole point of these buttons is to be easily accessible, and they're kind of not. They're hard to hit. Also, it's really weird that there's no cut and dry warranty for their peripherals. It's all bundled in with a 2-year warranty for their PC components, which you know doesn't carry the same warranty as this controller. Another weird thing, you do have 3 metal contact pads, which you think would be for a little cradle or dock to charge this thing. That's not included, and when I searched online, there was no evidence that even existed. So it's almost like they made this feature and then never followed through with actually creating the dock to cradle it into. Also another weird discrepancy. It says 500 milliamp hour on the back of this little placard here on the sticker, but the instruction manual said it had a 600 milliamp hour. They're both Paquito, very damn small, but one's a little bit smaller. Which one is it? I'm not gonna do a teardown or disassembly and inspect the pack. Also, there is removable thumbstick caps, which you need to get to by removing this faceplate. So I guess that's the purpose of having this removable plate, is so you can remove these here bases. No, that doesn't make sense, because even with the faceplate installed, you can still pop off the stems or shafts from the base of the thumbstick like this. Oh god, I'm so strong with my fingers. And this is a cool feature and all, except for the fact that it serves no purpose because there are no other thumbstick cap options. No other heights, no other shapes, concaved or domed, low, medium, and high rise. They don't sell replacements if these get lost or anything. So what is the point of having removable thumbstick caps if there is no point to it? Same thing with the swappable faceplate. Swappable with what? There's no replacements for it. And then I think what ties together this weird meal that I'm feasting on here is the fact that this controller doesn't even exist on the manufacturer's website, only being sold through the third-party vendor whose website I've been showing, and the link will be down in the description below. But the actual company, Machenike or Machenike or whatever the hell you want to call them, Machenike, on their website, they only show other models of controllers, including the G6, which seems like a more feature-rich, higher-end controller with trigger stops and better rear Buttons, kind of the controller that I would have liked to have tested, no offense. But this controller was so highly recommended, and like I said, not even recommended, it was sternly recommended. It wasn't mandatory to review this controller, but it was strongly recommended for my audience that I take a peek at it, take a gander, and after gandering at it sternly for the last few days, getting a lot of stick time with it on Switch and PC, I'm not going to say I'm let down, but I am going to say that the hype isn't warranted for this controller. Yes, it does have magnetic Hall effect sticks, but I've also tested 4 or 5 other controllers on the channel that I liked more as a whole package that did also have those magnetic Hall effect thumbsticks. They were also limited to the same platforms of Switch and PC, so keep that in mind. The next con, there's no 3.5mm headphone jack. This also doesn't have a share button. Doesn't really matter because this doesn't work with PlayStation or Xbox, but this is not a share button. It's the function or FN button. Onto the pros. Cosmetically, I think this controller looks super sick. If this is covered with a 2-year warranty, that's a pro. But again, we don't know. The face buttons feel great. Unlike the Dpad, which is also mechanical, the face buttons actually feel great. The thumbsticks are of course going to be a pro because, you know, the stock input lag or delay was very, not only respectable, very good. 2 milliseconds wired and 4 milliseconds wireless with that dongle. Really good. The verdict, is this controller worth a pickup? Does it provide price to performance, bang for buck? I will say if you're a Switch player and you mostly play docked, this would make a very, very good Nintendo Switch controller. But as for PC, considering there is so many options in the price point and even cheaper, for example, the GameSir G7, which is about $40. Granted, that doesn't have the magnetic Hall effect thumbstick, so it could get stick drift, but again, $40 controller, sometimes even cheaper on sale. Better feature set. And I just feel like this controller has a lot of sacrifices made, a lot of shortcomings, a lot of cons that don't really balance out with the pros. The biggest pro being those magnetic Hall effect thumbstick modules, but this isn't new anymore. We've seen this on several controllers that I've reviewed on the channel. We're going to be seeing more over the next few months and years as it becomes a little bit more standardized in the controller industry, the video game industry. And I would recommend this for Switch, but if you're a PC player, I just feel like there's just a smorgasbord of better options out there. It's my personal opinion. This controller is linked in the description below. I hope you Stallions have a fantastic day. Drop in the comment section below what controllers you'd like to see featured on the channel, and I'll do my damnedest to get them on the table here for a little bit, getting tongue-tied over here, a little bit of fun in the sun. Peace. If you enjoyed the video, liking it helps it to get seen by more gamers. This information will reach and assist them as well, which in turn helps me grow this little channel, which I do greatly appreciate. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover news in the gaming community and industry, tutorials helping you get set up streaming and YouTubing, as well as honest gaming product reviews, keyboards, mice, headsets, controllers, mics, chairs, etc. There are some hefty exclusive discount codes found only in the description of my videos and only for the audience here at GamerHeaven. I have links to all my other platforms and socials in the description below. To get in touch with myself and the Stallions and Stallionettes of GamerHeaven, join the community Discord, and check me out at twitch.tv where I go live every other leap year on a blue moon if it falls into an odd calendar number, and my pH balance is on point. Just kidding, starting June I'm going to be live streaming a lot. Thanks for watching. This has been AK40 Kevin hosting GamerHeaven, and I'll see you tomorrow because I upload daily, all the time, 60% of the time, sometimes, most of the time. Peace.